Hey guys, our decline here, average picker. So, as you can see, we are back down here on the floor, and that only means one thing. We are working on challenge locks. A quick note, so I picked up one of these. Man, immensely useful and easier on the eyes than trying to squint at this stuff. But anyway, I had said I was going to do a video kind of updating on how I'm doing key cuts now, because I sort of have a technique. It doesn't produce a pretty key, but it produces one that's fairly functional, and I'm more confident in it not overshooting some of the cuts that we need to make. Now this one is already partially started, you can kind of tell. And what I do, and I've gone over this in other videos typically, is I just run a permanent marker. You can see that's blue there. Along the edge. And I've used blue, I've used red, I've used black. For me, and it probably doesn't look this way under the camera, but for me in this room, blue tends to work a little bit better. Black, just because of my overhead light, I was getting a little too much of a sheen and it was much more difficult to tell the scoring. But then it's just a matter of putting the key in. And you can do this a couple ways. I tend to go in with just a nail file or one of these jewelry file picks and do a scrape score. And what you end up doing is that you at least end up scraping away some of the ink you put down if you don't actually get a really deep score. You can do it also running a Dremel bit, something like you would use for engraving. So like one of these bits. And where did I put the, yeah, there we go. In which case, while you're spinning it in the Dremel, you very carefully try to run it into that hole and score the key. It works fine. You gotta be a little careful. You don't wanna get it chomped up in there and mess up the chamber too bad. The other problem is you need to be a little careful that you're using a good sized bit, because you don't wanna get one too small because it'll get in the corner of the key catch and then you just got an accident waiting to happen. So this one's already been done a little bit, like I said. I went through and I scored it, and then I just used the edge of one of these triangular bits just to kind of mark it off a little bit better. So these are the pins we're going to be trying to cut for. Oh, that guy's backwards. Yeah. Now, so which bit I use primarily. So these usually come in the little kits you can find. They usually all come together. You get, I don't know, there's like 3 or 4 of them. I happen to find these 2. This will work okay, but it produces this really weird wavy thing, and it's hard, I don't know. If this is all you've got, I would maybe stick to using a hand file. The end result could be a little hard to get out of and shape the key. But this guy turned out to be darn well near perfect. He's just the right size for it all. We can even see if we line up with a pin, he's going to be cutting that key if we go completely flat onto it. He's going to end up cutting that chamber pretty well to what that pin needs to be. But what's nice about it is it's got the corner, and I tend to start with the corner and then kind of bring it in. So there's a few other little nuances I've been fooling around with on it. I tend to start with the first cut back here. And when you're scoring this, you're not usually scoring directly centered. And you can probably tell by the spacing on here, it's not that perfect. And that's fine. I tend to start my first cut actually back a little too far. I tend to start it here and then come into it, and I just keep watching that first pin and rechecking it in the chamber until it's almost flush, and then I kind of know where it is. Now what that's going to result in is my first chamber on a lot of my keys tends to be really big, and it kind of nudges everything that way. But it works, and it works pretty well actually. So let's do a little bit and see what we can get. So what we've done is we've just loaded up the key pins in the chambers and put the key in, and I'm just kind of using this to get a rough idea for how deep I'm going to have to go. So you can see right off my first 2 cuts are going to have to go fairly deep into the key My third one, I barely want to touch it. And then I'm going to have to go pretty deep again. And this one is actually pretty much zero bitted. So if I end up hitting that chamber, I'm kind of in trouble. But luckily I've got a very long key. And so we've got some wiggle room. Shouldn't be a problem. I am probably going to come through and add a sixth pin later. We'll see where we get with these 5 first. Okay, so you can see I just kind of balanced the Dremel on whatever pair of pliers I happen to have laying around at the time. And this just kind of gives me a little work area to nudge around on. Works fine. I'm not spinning the Dremel all that quickly. Pretty much into the speed that I would be using if I was turning pins. So I'm not going too quick with it. And I know my first 2 cuts have to be pretty deep. So we will make those, we'll start making those cuts now. Okay, Dremel coming on, warning. I need a slightly better pair of pliers to balance that on. I had a good bit of wiggle. You can see very light touch, and we're already getting well into the key. Now, when you're doing it, and it's the same with hand filing, you do want to make sure, actually, that you are hitting both sides of the key about as equally as you can. You can smooth it out later. It's not a huge deal, but you do want to be aware of that because it is possible that when you're, even if you're just hand filing, that you're actually you can actually end up grooving in more to one side of the key than the other, and that can cause the pin to, when you're checking it, it can give you some inaccurate readings. But basically what I'm looking for is if that pin is dropping any when I keep checking it, and if it's not, I'm just going to keep boring that out a little bit. And what I'll do is I'll do one side a little more and then I'll check it. And then I do the other side a little bit more and check it. And that way I can start to get an idea of where the pin is falling in that groove and shuffle all the work in that direction. Okay, so that pin is dropping. Has dropped down some. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move over, and I'm going to start doing some initial cuts on the second pin. And I'm going to go back every so often and hit the first one a little bit more. And I'm just going to, so concentrate the work on the second, and now but still going every so often and hitting the first one. It's a bit awkward to do around the camera, actually. Okay, so there's where we're at. And we're gonna check it. And oh, nice. You can see we're real close. That first pin does still have to come down more, and the second still does. But we're almost right in there. So I can now start to think about, I've got a little bit of room I can take off of the third pin. And the fourth has to dip down a heck of a lot. So I'll start dropping the fourth pin, and I'll every so often kind of groove this way to hit that third one. And I'll lightly brush on 2, and I'll probably come in a little deeper on 1 every so often during this whole process while I'm doing it. But 4 is what we're going to really concentrate on, because if I can get them all down to kind of that level, even a little bit better on the first one maybe, but yeah, if I can generally get them down to that, that's really easy to make up for once you're just kind of smoothing the key out. So I did a couple more minutes off camera there, but you can see we've dropped that fourth pin down pretty good. So now it's just really a matter, and we've even dropped the first one a tiny bit more. So I'd say we're kind of technically into just the rounding. We're entering, there's just sort of rounding it off phase. And then I am going to come through and add a 6th pin. So I'll end up notching that one out and doing it. Because, you know, you've got a key that'll accommodate 6 pins, why, and a core, why do 5? But yeah, you can see, so that bit, and hopefully, you know, if you're really getting into this and you're doing challenge lock building, you have at least acquired a Dremel. It's kind of an invaluable tool, and it's probably one of the cheaper ways to get you around a lot of this work without just sitting and doing everything by hand. Which gets a little tedious. I mean, it's doable, but let's face it, this is a little bit nicer. But that bit just does a really great job. Yeah, no, this looks really rough. We'll get it smoothed out. We'll get those climbs a little better. And that is another thing you have to start thinking about, because those pins, as they go in, they do have to be able to ride up and down that. So that is a little steep. Like once it's under spring pressure, I mean, other than being a bit sloppy, that, you know, those pins back here are going to have to ride over that, and under springs that might be a bit of a climb, so we'll angle that out a little bit and smooth it, and that's not going to be a problem. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to come in, we're just going to bite into that little ledge a little bit more and kind of even it out. So yeah, I'm going to try to keep this tutorial as quick as possible, so I'm not going to go through and do the entire key, but I think you can kind of see where this is headed. And really this was mostly about singing the praises to that little bit, and it's pretty easy to come by. Like I said, it's in most Dremel kits, so it's not a hard one to find. You probably don't even have to, you don't have to order it or anything. You can probably just find them at Lowe's or wherever you normally can find Dremel stuff, and it's really cheap. So there we go, guys. All right, have a good one.